Discover over 100 episodes of Bartholomew Town on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is the Bartholomew Town Podcast.
We are a progressive town, and so my biggest interest has been seeing that progressive bloc turn into policy on the local level.
Welcome in to another edition of the Bartholomew Town Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Bartholomew. On today's episode, talking South Kingstown with SK School Committee Vice Chair Sarah Markey. She's not a household name, but some followers of Rhode Island politics are probably aware of Sarah Markey. Now, she's a union official that sits on the South Kingstown School Committee, and as such has been at the center of some controversy, even some ethics rulings, as to whether or not that's an appropriate position for a union official to hold. That can be applied across a number of industries, a number of political elected offices. So it's an interesting litmus test of sorts. So obviously a portion of this conversation with Sarah Markey is focused on that. But I also evaluate South Kingstown from her perspective in terms of the political climate in SK, in terms of the housing climate, in terms of the climate. We got to a lot, and it's a fun conversation with Sarah Markey, the SK School Committee's Vice Chair, in a matter of moments. All right, beloved Bartholomew Town audience, my appeal to you as we come to, well, we still have a little bit of time to go, but before we start thinking about the end of the year, start thinking towards 2020, well, I'm already doing that, and I'll be rolling out some new plans, some exciting stuff for you in the coming weeks. But my appeal to you, if you haven't already done so, please drop a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening right now. Now, I took a look at the numbers of people who had left a review, and let me just say it's a little lower than the number of people who are listening to this program on a regular basis. So I'd like to see that needle move maybe before the end of the year. Why not? It certainly helps the cause over here. And it would cost you some time, I guess, maybe in the 30 to 60-second range. But my beloved audience, we've been on this journey together since March 2018. Here we are, November 2019, still going strong. Big plans ahead. So if you want to leave you know what? You can leave a 1-star review. That's fine. You might say, this guy's a clown. I literally can't believe that this guy has a podcast. This person has no right to have any kind of platform. You could write any kind of review you'd like, but hopefully on the positive side, just something a lot of people, I know they push this all the time. They some podcasts, as I listen to them, they're constantly reminding you of how you can contribute to the podcast's growth just by leaving a rating or a review or subscribing or telling a friend, et cetera, et cetera. And I try not to bog down this program with that business. But my appeal to you, I think that's the third time I've said appeal here in the last 60 seconds. I'm going to wrap this up because it's been more than 60 seconds. If you get a chance, leave a rating and a review. It'd mean a lot to me. It would help the podcast grow. And you never know, you might discover a new favorite word in the process. All right, without further ado, let's get right to it. My conversation with South Kingstown School Committee Vice Chair, talking South Kingstown, Rhode Island, with Sarah Markey.
As you mentioned, I'm a community and labor organizer, and I have been for years. And my reason to run for the school committee really at the time was that I'm so involved in education locally. I have 2 kids, and I just had a vision for ways that things could be done to provide really great services for students that also respected and lifted up the voice of educators and school employees and administrators. And so I ran quite naively in some ways. I was really interested in keeping a local elementary school open.
Wakefield.
Yeah, right? Wakefield, yeah. And we had a great groundswell of community members and parents who said, we love our community elementary schools. It's part of what we want in South Kingstown. And so when we were elected, we kept Wakefield Elementary open, as we should have. I still stand by that decision, and I think it's a great elementary school, as are our other 3. But honestly, I was really naive to the pushback I would get. It should have occurred to me probably because before I even ran, the school district attorney at the time, at the request of the former school committee chair, wrote a memo about why I couldn't be appointed because I was up for an appointment, I think in October of 2017. I put my name in the hat for a vacancy. And the town council ultimately didn't appoint me. But part of the reason is that there was this like lengthy, now we know after the ethics advisory, it was frankly, the memo from the school district attorney was inaccurate. And really, I think served as like a political hit piece, right? These are all the reasons this union person can't serve on a school committee. So I should have been aware that there would be some politics around it, but I wasn't. I kind of got caught up in the moment of, we have this great team of amazing women running for school committee, and we're committed to like leading in a different, transparent, progressive way. And so I think it was when Councilman DeCruz at the time sort of put a story out there that got picked up really quickly about there's a union person serving on the South Kingstown School Committee that, once it got covered in a paper, then we heard it on radio shows. And the question, I think, ultimately was, can this even happen, right? Is it possible that someone who works for a union for the teachers union, also be on a school committee? And so the ethics advisory ultimately in January of this year advised me that while there might be specific incidents that I have to come back for advice, I can't participate in negotiations with the teachers union or the paraprofessionals because they're a NEARI bargaining unit. And so that was fine because I expected that. So I recused myself around bargaining and specific issues that come up related to the bargaining agreement. I think part of why it was so unexpected for me is I realized a lot of folks have a different idea about unions than I do. Like I grew up in an area, I grew up in Allentown, Pennsylvania. My family weren't union members, but we were, working poor, struggled to get by. And so I came to community organizing and then the labor movement with this idea of like social and economic justice. And so that's how I think about unions. Like we're doing amazing things to center students, to fight for social justice issues. And so I was really surprised by some of what I saw as like this old school analysis of like, what is a labor union? That was really surprising to me.
And that was uniquely Rhode Island, do you think, or what was that?
Yeah, I don't
Uniquely
know.
South Kingstown?
No, a lot of actually the fear is not from South Kingstown, which is interesting. I get a lot of people that come up to me, especially when we were getting play for a while on the radio, that will say like, we're with you. We hear you. Like, we knew you worked for a labor union when you ran. It wasn't something I hid. So a lot of the like sort of fear that we saw was in other parts of the state. And I think some of it was uniquely Rhode Island, or uniquely the Northeast, because unions are rightfully so seen as powerful. And this felt like a power grab to some people, but I think that's based on their values and their understanding of a union. The other thing is like my job is one thing in my life, right? Like my job working at NEARI as a field staff person is working with a set of locals, not South Kingstown, on things like bargaining and leadership development and organizing trainings. It didn't occur to me that someone would look at this one part of my life and say, that's just who she is, right? Discount that I'm a mom and I run a community meeting space and bookstore called The Collective with 3 other women. Like I'm lots of things, and my employer doesn't dictate my opinion on things, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, and it's you set it up as a question of values in the sense of, can you, if you encounter something that you believe is potentially going to compromise either your vote or your position with the NEA, that you could make that decision as well. I mean, and that's the classic self-policing. I mean, how often have we seen that work? People have a right to be skeptical. But at the same time, I mean, there is that element as well that, recusal is available if on your end. And I think a lot of people in this issue, they assume that you were going to kind of take almost like the Sam Bell inside the Senate approach, like the bull in the china shop approach, and push things rather than take all the different aspects of your life, including your position with the union, but applying that in as legitimate a way as possible on each question. You don't have to go about it as, hey, look, I'm a union official and everything I decide here is 100% for that cause.
No, exactly. And, I will say NEARI is a great employer, right? They don't direct my campaign. They weren't involved in my campaign. They're not involved in my role on the school committee. It's my personal life, right? And I think actually more employers should probably be like that. Give people space to have opinions on political issues and to get involved civically as they want to. I just don't get the kind of, sometimes it felt like there was this like idea that there's a war room and we're like mapping out how to take over the state. That's not the case. And it's also not the case that I'm like in charge, which is another kind of spin that got put out. Like I was a big union official. I'm essentially a field staff, of which there are 7 of us, right? So it's not as if I'm like running things
Right.
the way people thought. And I think you're exactly right. I mean, no one should go into any like newly elected position without asking questions and really listening deeply to what people care about. That's really important. But also, I think, we're there to do a very specific job on the school committee, which is to set policy and procedures for making sure that our students are well supported, our teachers, staff, administrators are well supported. It's very limited in scope in a lot of ways.
Right. Let's look at South Kingstown as a
Yes.
whole and what's going on from your vantage point in terms of, the schools and South Kingstown politics right now.
Yeah.
There are substantially less students in South Kingstown schools today than there were even when I was in South County. I didn't go to SK, I went to Charahoe, but 20 years ago, for example. There's been a sort of a shift, if you will, in the dynamics of the community. Can you sum that up and explain that? How does that affect someone out there outside of SK as well?
Yeah, I think we have a lot of work to do. And I suspect this isn't unique to South Kingstown because there's declining student population in most of New England, right? And in South Kingstown, I think by design, the zoning, the planning, the former town councils, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, the intent was to really draw in more retirees, right? So when we saw new housing go up, it was senior housing or over 55 housing. And so there wasn't an influx of development that was targeted towards families or young families. But I will say that, housing is the issue. Like, I think we have great schools in South Kingstown. People are moving to South Kingstown for our schools, whether it's the traditional pathway or it's the dual language immersion program that we have that is amazing. But it's housing. And I think our town council and our town manager, as well as like multiple committees, because we have a really engaged public in South Kingstown, are really looking at how do we address the housing issue, which to me is critically important. Both ownership and rentals, because I will say, my sister works in a sales position at a local store, and she couldn't find a rental for about 1.5 years and lived on my couch, right? There's no affordable rentals.
Inside the South Kingstown or broadly in South County?
In South
Washington
Kingstown,
County,
yeah, there's just not affordable rentals either. But on the affordable housing for home ownership, I think there are things that we're looking at doing and that we're seeing policy being furthered on housing. One is this idea of building additional homes on your lot, right? Because a lot of lots in South Kingstown, it turns out, are larger lots. And so there's a little bit of a movement now to develop additional housing, like a smaller house on your lot that you could then turn into a rental property that addresses some of the rental issue and then brings in income for someone else. So that's a thing that we're seeing more of and more interest in South County. And the other is, we do have more affordable housing than the data says that the state keeps, because we have a lot of houses that have just been owned by the same person for years and years and years, but they weren't deeded affordable, but they do fall under the $200,000 or $250,000 mark. And so, so that is something we have to look at, is how do we ensure that those homes stay affordable once someone does decide to retire or move. And I think the other thing is I don't think it's a development for me. In my perspective, it's not a development question. We don't need a ton of new development because we also are essentially like Rhode Island's backyard, right? I mean, the green space in South County is amazing, both Charlestown and South Kingstown. And I think we want to protect that. But there's a lot more we can do around, Main Street or Kingstown Road in Peacedale, where we have businesses and living happening. Like there's some beautiful old buildings that could potentially be apartments or lofts. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for housing, but housing I think is really the problem with declining enrollment and cost of living. So they're all connected, right? So economic justice is connected to housing, is connected to education. So we do have declining enrollment, but the recent demographics that we've gotten say that eventually it's going to pick up again. And so we just have to be smart to make sure that our schools are right-sized, that we don't have lots of empty classrooms, but that we don't get to capacity where if and when there is a boom in student age population, we don't have enough space. And so it is a really tricky balance, but I think the way we've met that for now is keeping our 4 elementary schools and downsizing to 1 middle school. And so Curtis Corner Middle School will be closed. That's something that we've already decided on, we voted on, and there's some questions about it, like the great land around it.
This golf course, the athletic facilities
yes,
that are
our
there.
field, our football field. But it is the school that is it's the right time to close Curtis Corner and transition middle school to Broad Rock.
What was kind of the vote on that? Has it happened yet? The Curtis Corner vote, and what were the numbers?
No, we all support closing Curtis Corner, so it's 7-0. Yeah.
Okay.
But the timeline isn't quite set yet because part of what we need to do is pass a bond probably in November 2020 to build onto Broad Rock so we can house all of the middle school there. So we have a facilities plan that is looking at how to improve our high school and to build onto Broad Rock.
So we see the affordable housing question as at the center of just about every municipality around the state, and at some level, and one scale or another. But that obviously impacts SK. What else is necessary to take South Kingstown to the next level? Is it an infrastructure question? What about ideas? There's the Tetrahydro Club there on Main Street. That we had him on, Justin. We had him on earlier in the year. And, just as a litmus test for what are SK residents willing to, quote unquote, put up with, or how far are they willing to go as far as new businesses, new industries, things that may seem to be, not consistent with the SK of the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I live like a block from the Tetrahydro Club.
Yep.
And was really sad at first because I wanted to buy that building and build an old movie theater. Like it was my dream. But you don't even notice it's there, frankly, right? Like it's really like a part of the fabric of the community, like anything else. And I think that if you look at like voting patterns in South Kingstown is really progressive. Goes Bernie, goes Reaganburg, right? We are a progressive town. And so my biggest interest has been seeing that progressive bloc turn into policy on the local level, right? So how I think that plays out is I think people do want to support new businesses, but I think we also don't want a ton of big boxes, right? Like what you hear from people is we want to protect and preserve that village atmosphere at the same time that we figure out these problems like affordable housing, like new businesses, like jobs, because economic justice is related to all this. People have to be able to make a living wage so that they can afford to rent or buy a house where they live, right? So we both need, it's less, I think, that we need more houses, it's that we need people being able to afford to live there. So maybe it's both, right? But we can't leave the economic justice issues out of this either. And so that's where like statewide legislation, like raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, impacts South Kingstown, because there are people that you buy your coffee from at Dunkin' Donuts, or, you go to Phil's and they're mostly wait staff, but they're not, I think everyone needs to be making more money, essentially. Low wage workers need to be making more money, if that makes sense. And that would really help people to be able to afford to live where they work. So I think in South Kingstown, there is an appetite for new businesses. There is an appetite for economic justice, but there isn't an appetite to look like everywhere else. I mean, I think people want to protect the history of the villages and the village feel, for sure. Yeah.
What about the relationship with URI? Is there, the relationship between Brown, RISD, et cetera, and Providence is an interesting one. There's always kind of a back and forth taxation-wise. It never seems perfectly clean.
Yeah.
What about URI to SK?
So it's so interesting because so many people who work at URI live in our community, right? So, and URI is right there. And so I think it's an underutilized relationship for sure, especially with the schools. It frequently occurs to me when we're trying to figure out a resource or a potential partnership that we should be drawing on URI more. But I think generally URI is a good partner for the town. And I think it's hard to separate URI from its employees, and its employees are a distinct portion of our town. And I just recently, we had at the school committee level worked with Exeter West Greenwich in URI to bring in a speaker, Alfie Cohn, to talk about education and hands-on learning and play-based learning. And it's this wonderful, light lift of a partnership where we can draw on the resources of URI and their expertise to have this nationally or internationally renowned speaker come in and talk directly to parents and community members in South Kingstown. Those are the sorts of like soft benefits I think we get. But I do think we need to look deeper into how to draw on URI to support our schools, right? To really support some of the curriculum or the practices that we have in place in the district. And I think that is underutilized.
What about sports in South Kingstown? I mean, sports is king in Rhode Island. It's, from my vantage point, overemphasized, even though I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's a good, it's not a good thing that's overemphasized, but high school sports, sports as a whole, they can play a solid and very important role in community and in school building. At the same time, SK is somewhat notorious for, you saw the baseball coach situation that Jim Hummel pointed out, just from anecdotal evidence. It seems like that SK soccer, basketball, et cetera, that is a major part of the school, major part of the community. Is that in a healthy place right now?
Yeah, this is a good question. So I went to my first football game a couple weeks ago because my son is in the band, my 14-year-old. And
what does he play?
The trumpet. He plays the drums too, but in the band, he plays the trumpet.
Nice.
And we have a great music and arts and theater program, especially, K through 12. It's amazing. So when I went, I was a little unsure of what to expect because I hadn't been to a high school football game before. And what I thought was the most interesting is that it felt like half the high school was there. I mean, this is what the kids were doing on a Friday night. The students from the high school they were there to support the football team. And to me, that plays a really important role, as you said, in building community and being a safe place for kids to hang out, right? I think it's a larger question that's not just about sports, which is about restorative practice and restorative justice. I mean, we have a school, Broad Rock, that does great work on restorative practice. So it's less punishment focused discipline and more about the restorative repairing of relationships, taking accountability. And one thing I'm really committed to and working on with our new superintendent is if we believe in restorative practice, it can't just be at one school. It can't be in one classroom. It has to be a school-wide culture. And so I think that extends to sports too and to coaches, right? Where you don't have an environment of fear, and we're really working on on the relationships and taking a restorative approach even to coaching. That being said, I think the coaches I've met, the staff I've interacted with are pretty amazing, right? I mean, my son was playing sports up until high school, and everyone was always just really supportive and really, I think, centering the idea that, you know, this should be fun for kids, right? And I think that's something we just have to, as adults, remind ourselves of, right? This is, yes, it's competitive, but this should ultimately be a safe and fun place for kids. But I do think it's restorative practice and really centering that in our school-wide culture.
Yeah, that's an interesting answer. I'm glad to hear that you find it to be in a safe place or in a good place.
Yeah.
You know, because that's important. And yeah, there are definitely really solid people that I know personally coaching inside SK and so forth that are, you know, I know they try to bring that, but yeah, just for whatever reason, the last couple of weeks it's been bugging me. I don't know what it is. I'm not against the Interscholastic League, just something just, you know, all these the Burrillville kids. Screaming at the CF kids. That reminded me of how often I've seen very similar things as a referee in the Interscholastic League on a regular basis. I would even go so far as to say. So I just wonder, talking with people in the schools, especially places where sports are clearly at the forefront of, I guess, the overall educational program, you know, how that all factors in and, you know, if it does at all.
Well, I think it's also, you know, one thing I think about all the time on school committee is modeling behavior for children, like my children especially, but other children. And I think there's a lot of pressure on the current school committee in some ways because we are amazingly and awesomely 7 women, which I can't think of another school committee that is all women, but maybe I just don't know. And then 3 of us are under 40, which is another sort of unique demographic, I think, for town office. So, you know, so I can't do the math, but 3 out of 7. And then 4 of us have young kids, right? So in elementary school. Also unusual for town bodies like town council or school committee. So with all those things playing out, it feels like there's a lot of pressure to model for our students. And I think about it for my kids, as I said, but also for girls, how to interact with the public, how to disagree, how to work through hard problems. I feel a lot of pressure to like model good behavior while doing that for students, right? So it's not just setting policy and procedure, it's also not throwing down when you feel like that's what you want to do sometimes because there's a bunch of eyes on you that are, you know, kids.
Last question. Kind of circling back to where we were at the beginning, you know, talking about the 2018 sort of media storm you were in.
Yeah.
You know, and again, there's no doubt that the NEA is happy to have its members on school committees. I mean, I'm sure it's not like they're saying, oh, whatever. I'm sure they're pleased with that. Your position is, though, that there was no one organized. You were certainly not the organizer of a statewide campaign like that. So to push back on some of the media in the state here, I guess. Your answer, kind of almost a year after the fact, I guess. But you know, it's kind of, you've settled into a groove. Did you feel like you got a fair shake on that issue from the media as a whole on a statewide basis? You know, pushing back on the broad question of it's inappropriate for you to sit on the school committee and you were organizing in some way, or the NEARI was organizing in some way to make a statewide campaign of where union officials would sit on governing bodies.
I mean, I have a couple questions. I have a couple answers to that, and that was a really good question. The one is, I don't think I got a fair shake. I mean, just to think about how the story broke across the state, to be perfectly blunt and honest, it broke because someone who was on the town council who had sexually harassed me, right, and other women we now know based on public records from the town council meetings, decided to make it a news story, right, that I was elected. So I was pretty shocked, and later did come out and shared my story, as well as 5 other women, about how this person had just been like coming on to us. So I was in shock to be like in the situation where I'm reading an article from a town council member who has repeatedly come on to me. Like, that was just a personal shock. Like, what is going on in the world, right? But once that happened, I think that I don't know that I didn't get a fair shake, because I never really wanted to talk to the media. So I was given opportunities, and I think that's what you get, right? That's a fair shake. You get an opportunity to tell your story. I just didn't really want to. And the reason is that I'm not really interested in being elected, right? I ran because I really believed in a set of values, and I believed in keeping Wakefield Elementary School open, and I believe that we could be so much better as a governing body than the former school committee. And that's why I ran. And so it's not in me necessarily to sort of want to be in news stories or want to be the face of like an elected campaign. That's just not, I'm an organizer. You're kind of behind the scenes, right? But to the other part of your question, to be perfectly honest, my boss at NEARI thought I was insane that I wanted to run for school committee. It is a thankless, hard job. There wasn't any prodding or pushing or strategizing because they just were like, we'll support you. Do what you want to do.
This is Bob Walsh?
Bob Walsh, yeah. We'll support you, emotionally, but do what you want to do. But that's a crazy idea, right? But I have a lot of crazy ideas.
So Walsh said it was a crazy idea from just thinking in terms of logistics on your end, not so much as a crazy idea. This is going to create problems for us.
No, exactly. I think
you as a human being are going to be taxed by
That's
this.
right. Yeah. And Bob Walsh is a really, really nice guy. And I think he was more worried about how am I going to balance my life, because I'm already very busy. But once I decided, they just support me emotionally as a human, right? There's no strategizing. And frankly, as an organizer, it would be the worst strategy in the world to take over school committees or town councils with union staff. Like, it would be a much better idea to just get pro public education people elected, right? It's not worth the dance I've had to do and the explanations I had to do to put a union staff person on an elected body. It just doesn't make sense as a strategy.
Yeah. I guess in the state here we've seen there was another recent ruling on this.
Val Lawson?
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. Where, we've seen kind of a consistency of, hey, look, if you're talking about broad issues, then, you're going to be ethically viable to vote, even if it's within your industry that you represent in your career, So we've seen that kind of litmus test. At the same time, the political optics, the back and forth, it's going to pop up on, some of these websites, the tabloid that we have here in town. You're going to hear it on the radio. You're going to eventually see it in the newspapers, on TV. This debate is, or even on social media, you're going to see there's always going to be someone to prod and say, well, there's a major problem here. There's going to be no way for there not to be a conflict of interest. There's always going to be that person to use that as ammunition against you. So
right. And frankly, I guess my biggest fear about this past year is, the other thing I do is I run The Collective, which is a meeting space with 3 other women, and it's a bookstore, and it's a social justice bookstore. And we do a lot of trainings and workshops there. And sometimes we host people in to do how to run for office, not nonpartisan, but how do you run for office? And we need good candidates. That is my biggest concern right now, is we need good candidates at the town level for school committee, for town council, people with a vision, hopefully from my perspective with a progressive vision. And I don't want people to see what happened to me or to other members of our school committee and then not run, because I think this was a unique circumstance. I don't think it's usually as polarizing, because that is ultimately what South Kingstown is going to need in the future and what every other town and city needs, which is good, committed people, diverse, racially, gender-wise, sexual orientation, whatever. We need more diverse, progressive voices at the town level, and I just hope that those people continue to run.
As always, thanks so much for spending some time here on the Bartholomew Town Podcast. Remember, new episodes every Tuesday and Friday, and daily content on Instagram at Bartholomew Town Podcast. Until next time, I'm Bill Bartholomew. We'll talk soon.
At HealthSource RI for Employers, we provide access to health insurance to more than 1,100 local businesses and nonprofits, and 96% of them renew through us every year. Maybe it's our choice of 19 different health plans, our 10 years of customizing solutions, or our one local team of dedicated experts helping employers find quality health insurance. See how our numbers stack up for you. Learn more at healthsourceri.com/employers.